Everyone knows the story of the Titanic, the luxury ship, the iceberg, the tragedy. But what almost nobody knows is that before it was a marvel of engineering, it was, above all, a massive financial project, a business built to control a million-dollar market, with bankers, contracts, and fortunes that shaped the economic game of the 20th century. Today, you'll discover how the Titanic was a bet for power, and how economic decisions doomed it before it even touched the water. And at the end, the darkest theories that still divide historians. Historical context: the battle for the Atlantic. At the start of the 20th century, the Atlantic was the highway of money. Gold, goods, migrants, and elites moved between Europe and America. In these busy waters, two companies fought for total control. The Cunard Line, backed by the British government, with the Lusitania and the Mauretania, two giants that broke speed and prestige records. And the White Star Line, which would soon be bought by a banker ready to change the rules. J.P. Morgan enters the game. In 1902, J.P. Morgan, an American banker with enormous ambition, bought the White Star Line through his company IMM. His strategy was simple but bold. Forget speed and focus on luxury, size, and exclusivity. He wanted his ships to be floating palaces, attracting both the elite and thousands of migrants, heading for the American dream. It no longer mattered who arrived first, only who offered the most unforgettable experience. Do you want to know how this power game ended in the most famous tragedy at sea? Let's begin. J.P. Morgan didn't just buy the White Star Line. He secured the most valuable transatlantic routes, a full fleet of ships, and a no-bid contract with Harland and Wolff Shipyard, with guaranteed profits and full control over design. He wasn't just a player on the board, he owned the board. Morgan didn't want just one ship. He wanted an entire class of superliners. That was his master plan. 3 twin ocean liners that would redefine luxury, scale, and prestige at sea. Olympic, Titanic, and later, the Britannic. Each one bigger, more expensive, and more impressive than the last. How to finance a floating empire? Morgan combined private capital, debt, and selling shares of his IMM company, building the Titanic, the most luxurious ship of its time, and the most dangerous without anyone knowing it. Between 1909 and 1912, over 15,000 workers built the Titanic for £1.5 million, about $7.5 million today. It wasn't just an engineering project, it was a symbol of power. A 5-star hotel on water, grand dining rooms, indoor pool, gym, luxury suites. Everything designed to impress and to hide the cracks behind the marble and velvet. But luxury had a price. Only 20 lifeboats for more than 2,000 people. Safety sacrificed for aesthetics. Parts of the hull built with cheaper, weaker steel and rivets. At least 8 deaths in the shipyard, hidden to protect the perfect image. Dozens more injured or disabled. Technically, the Titanic was a marvel, but in its details, it was fragile. The maiden voyage. The Titanic was ready. 3 years of construction, millions invested, and a media campaign that sold it as unsinkable. When it sailed from Southampton on April 10, 1912, no one imagined this would also be its last trip. The world celebrated it as a triumph of humanity. It left for New York with 2,240 people on board. The ship was so big, it was like a floating city. The sinking. On the night of April 14th, with no moon and no waves to reveal the ice, the Titanic struck an iceberg at 11:40 p.m. The hull was torn below the waterline. Water flooded in fast. In less than 3 hours, the unsinkable ship went from being the pride of the world to a grave at the bottom of the Atlantic. Jewels, gold, fortunes, none of it mattered. Over 1,500 people died. Only 705 survived. The freezing water killed by hypothermia in minutes. It was the most shocking maritime tragedy of the 20th century. The sinking of the Titanic changed the maritime world forever. An international ice patrol was created. All ships were required to have enough lifeboats for every passenger. Safety, training, and communication protocols were improved. All at the cost of more than 1,500 lives. The dark theories. More than a century later, questions remain. Was it really an accident? Or were there hidden interests behind the most famous tragedy at sea? Here are the most well-known conspiracy theories, and you'll decide what to believe. 1. The Federal Reserve Theory. One popular theory claims the Titanic was sunk to eliminate opponents of the creation of the U.S. Federal Reserve, approved in 1913. According to this theory, 3 key men who died in the sinking opposed the project: John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, 3 of the richest and most influential men in America. The argument: without them, the Federal Reserve faced less resistance. The problem? There's no direct evidence they actively opposed the central bank, much less that they were killed for it. Still, the theory survives. 2. The Olympic Titanic switch. Another theory says the Titanic wasn't the Titanic. In 1911, its sister ship, the Olympic, suffered major damage in a collision. Some believe the White Star Line swapped their identities, painting the Olympic as the Titanic, and then sank it on purpose to claim insurance. Supporters point to differences in window placement, altered photos, shipyard worker testimonies. Historians, however, say there's no real proof, and that the theory doesn't hold up under technical or documentary analysis. But like everything on the internet, the story lives on. 3. An insurance scam? Finally, some believe the Titanic was sunk for an insurance payout. It was insured for more than 65% of its value. The theory says IMM, facing financial trouble, may have used the sinking as a way to get cash. But records show IMM didn't go bankrupt, but it did suffer losses. The insurance didn't cover the full cost. And there's no evidence the sinking was planned financially. Still, the idea that it was all about money never disappears. The Titanic was built as a symbol of power, but its sinking proved that money, prestige, and technology couldn't defeat the ocean. The Titanic wasn't just a tragedy, it was a lesson for humanity. Accident or conspiracy, an unavoidable disaster, or a dark plan disguised as a shipwreck. The official history remains clear, but the theories, doubts, and mysteries of the Titanic still float more than 100 years later. And maybe that's what makes it eternal. What do you think? Theories may divide us, but one truth remains. In the world of great fortunes, tragedies are never just tragedies. If you want more stories where money and power change the course of history, subscribe to Drakonomic. Here, we go beyond the surface.